What's up, everybody? This is Rebel here, and I have with me the original King Bonk and Tiny Elephant. Got the crew back together.
Hello.
And we're here with week 6 of Prospect Pleps, so we're gonna have some fun. I'm extremely tired, so just bear with me. So
He's
yeah,
not on the
let's.
verge of, dying.
That's plus.
I wouldn't
That's
go
good
that
though.
far. It's been a long day. Yeah. So let's hop on in, okay? I guess we can start off by looking at the rankings again, but at this point, not much has been changing. Um, we still have the top typical 5 that we've been seeing, and then we have the same kind of like bottom 5 out of that top 10, with the exception of a little shuffling here and there, and then we've had some of the people we've seen before rounding up the top 16. With Wintergreen, Dolphins, Supernova, Spartans, and them. I think Gorgons is a new guy in the top 16 here, and that's pretty good for them. I don't know if Snakey's actually got his computer fixed or not yet, and if he's been playing. Do you know anything
He
about that,
hasn't
Elephant?
he hasn't got a he hasn't got a ton of games in, so I don't think it's been fixed quite yet.
Okay. Well, we'll see how they do going forward. They're slowly creeping up. But yeah, nothing too out of the ordinary here. Um, yeah. So let's get into our games for Monday. Anything anybody wants to point out here? I know my team lost to Firecrackers. That was unfortunate.
Yeah, it wasn't even as close as it appears. Y'all sucked.
Wow. Nah, it was
No, it
much
was a very
closer.
good series. It was a very good
Yeah.
series.
What are you talking about? We literally took you to overtime in what, 2 games, or was it just one? I don't know.
It's just one. But
But
no, it was a
it,
very good series. Things that stand out that were kind of interesting were, let's
there's a
see.
couple 4
Erg,
O's.
Erg's got a 4-0,
Woo!
which is Bonk's new team, so I'm sure he was thrilled by that.
he just
Yes.
Um,
he's just sitting there in the
and then
background of every podcast, just
smiling.
like butting in every time we have something to say about him.
Exactly. And then we also have Gallimimus getting 2-2 by Legends of Tomorrow. Legends of Tomorrow have the least advanced stat-friendly profile I've ever seen, by far. They don't look good in any advanced stat I can find.
Is
But
that so? We're
they
already
continue to
throwing shade
win.
in this podcast.
No, no, no,
No, I'm
no,
just
no, no.
kidding.
But my point here is this: they 2-2'd us when we were playing extremely well, and they 2-2'd Gallimimus, and they've consistently won this entire season. And so I don't know what they've done, but they figured something out because they're winning. They're at least 2-2ing their big matchups and crushing their lesser ones. And even though the stats don't look kind, like they're making
I
it
mean,
work.
you guys might have 3-1 us this week, but I know a team that they didn't 2-2 or 3-1, and that was us. I'm just putting that out there.
Uh huh. I'm sure
Oh,
you are.
just get that off my chest real quick. But yeah, no, they're doing something right, and I think they had a little bit. They started off pretty strong, and I think they had a little bit of a slump in the middle of the season, and it seems
Hmm.
like they kind of pulled it back and are doing a little bit better. So then maybe they made an adjustment or something, but I don't know quite what trades went through Legends of Tomorrow because I don't have those in front of me. But yeah,
They've kind of kept it pretty straightforward with
I think so.
Chandler and or not Dendro, Vendetta
Yeah,
leading the team.
and Vendetta's not a bad player at all. I don't know
Vendetta's been doing
anything
great this
about
season.
Chandler.
He's
Yeah.
Chandler's also really good. They've got a really good one too, and they
Hmm.
have had consistent third man play. So they're a good team.
Anything interesting for Monday? Drizzle got their 4-0. That helped them out with the playoff race a little bit.
Hmm.
Um, Templars got a 4-0 in Wintergreen, and it's not super impactful for Wintergreen because they're kind of sitting in that like mid top 16 spot to latter half of that. But for
They are
Templars,
right.
they're like right on the cusp of trying to like keep from falling out of the playoff race. So that 4-0 was big for them.
It was. It was.
Yeah, so if
Um.
they can keep up something like that, maybe they can find themselves right there with Yoriks and Gorgons and maybe even Spartans. Moving into like the very edge of possibly getting a playoff spot. So that's good for them that they got that 4-0.
Absolutely. Moving into Wednesday, just because Wednesday you start to see a couple more interesting results. A couple things off the top are going to be Legends Tomorrow's 2-2 and Kappas, which goes back to the other thing I was talking about, which is Kappa's is like a mid-tier team, and to 2-2 them is not exactly the ideal result you want if you're Legends of Tomorrow. Um, Ravagers, after getting swept, pulled a game off of y'all, which, I mean, that's like crazy. That's no slight against y'all in any way, but that's good for them that they had to bounce back and got a win in at least against two really tough teams. And then Breadsticks continue to just beat the Slapsticks. Snow Owls
Yeah.
got 2-2'd by Templar. And there was one
Is that the
more
nickname for them?
here.
That's kind of
It's
derogatory.
sad, but it's what the stats committee
That
said.
that was on
Oh,
the stats on the
Wobegongs.
committee.
Yeah, and Wobegongs went down 3-1 to Seoul.
Yeah, so that's I don't know
Big
quite how
upset.
many series Wobegongs have lost so far, but I think that's their second series they've
Ve-
dropped.
Very, very little series they've gone negative in.
Yeah, no,
But
they've done very well.
So to drop a series from Sparks is a top 5 team, and at times they've been on the very edge of the top 5, but they've proven that they're able to perform. And to drop a series to them, you go, okay, Wobegongs is a good team. That's like their first, I believe. Don't hold me to it, but that's their first series they drop, and so like it's gonna happen. And they lost to a good team, but then to come in this week and then lose to Seoul, who it's not a bad team, but they're still one of those middle of the pack teams fighting to try to get a spot in the playoff. And then to drop that series to them, first of all, it's big for Seoul. Second of all, that's starting to like shake for Wobegongs.
Wobegongs is a team that, I've talked a lot about how you beat them. I've talked a lot about, I spent a lot of time talking about them on this podcast.
We've just dissected them so much
We've
that teams are
dissected them a
figuring it
ton.
out.
To the point when we scrimmed them, they named themselves number 4 on your power rankings. But fundamentally to me, Wobegongs has to be on it. Because when they're not on their game, when they're not playing on their peak, they can get scored on, and because they're so aerially dependent, and we're in Prospect, and people don't have to still like mess up a lot. There are games where they'll take 10
So
shots
bad.
and just, you'll take 10 shots, 3 good saves, and the rest hit the sidewall. You know what I mean? And because of
Post VAR
that,
MVP.
yeah, and because that happens, yeah, there are series where they could look dominant statistically and still lose. I don't know what it necessarily is for Seoul, but the Seoul series, but I think Lunar's going to be really interesting because it's basically a 3-team race.
Mhm.
And
And
in the
speaking,
playoffs, they're going to have to be at their peak consistently in back-to-back like back-to-back series, let alone weeks. And I'm curious if they can hold that peak for that long, or if they're going to have a series where they can't maintain. Because like we saw that against Gallimimus, they'll tell you that they kind of messed around, and that's why they let Gallimimus back in that series. And that may be true. I can't speak to their mindset, but at the same time, it says something that Gallimimus was able to pull 3 straight back.
yeah.
So
And speaking of Lunar and the current playoff race, I've got here that what's written down. It says there's 7 teams between 20 and 25 wins on the season. And when you think about that, 20 and 25 wins, you sweep a series and you're up from 20 to 24, or you're up from 21 to 25. So all of these are pretty much within all these 7 teams are pretty much within a series of each other. One team messes up, the other one's in there. So by no means are any of these teams out, and they all still have a really good shot. So it's a super tight race in the Lunar Conference. And
it
for
is.
Seoul to pull off the 3-1 is good going forward, and hopefully they can continue that. If they are able to pull off a 3-1 out of the 2 or 3 series that we have left, next thing you know, they're in that last 7th seed.
I mean, if you pull up the standings, it literally saved them because it put them at 20 and 28. If they go into that series and get 3-1 or 2-2, they're significantly out of the race. Whereas now they're only a game behind Urix and 2 games out, or 3 games behind in the playoff to get the 7th seed. So
Yeah.
that's huge for them.
Definitely. And if we look at the Solar, and let's go ahead and actually look at these conferences real quick. So we'll pull up Lunar just so you see what we're talking about. You had Isopod, Supernova, Wintergreen, Spartans, Gorgons, Urix, and Soul, all within that 5-game gap right around that black line right there, which is the playoff race cutoff. But if we look at Solar, things are pretty different. You have
It is more or less locked down. It's kind
Yeah.
of strange how
Yeah,
crazy
so
this.
you don't have like the 5-team spread, but you have like the 5-game spread here. Whereas you have the teams that are in the playoffs at this point that are at the very least 5 games ahead of the teams that are out of it. And so that 5-game spread is just spread across 2 teams at this point, not an entire list of teams. So really, there's given any like with the exception of any miracles or just amazing late season comebacks, it's pretty locked down. There might be a chance for Airbuds or Kappas or Mambas to sneak in there.
Airbuds
and-
had their best shot. So this is one thing I wanted to point out, just because this result happened last week. Airbuds played Dolphins, and they 2-2'd them. They really needed.
Yeah, and if you look at
asking
that,
for a sweep is really hard to do. To be clear, but a sweep puts them in the playoffs,
yeah, sweep puts them tied with Dolphins, I believe, at
and they would
25-25.
have the conference win. They would have the advantage in conference win loss.
That's true.
So
And now they have 3 games left, and I know one of them's against Nebelungs. I don't know who their other 2 are against off the
they play
top of my head.
Firecrackers.
Firecrackers.
They play Nebelungs and Firecrackers, which is just a brutal week. Like,
So yeah,
yes, it's trumpeting both of us, but it's true.
So yeah, 2 of their 3 games left, are games where they're gonna have to go in there and play their asses off to expect to win, and so effectively not getting anything better than a 2-2 against Dolphins, they might have killed their playoff hopes here. I want to say hopefully they can do it, but I also don't because they play both of our teams. But we'll see.
Yeah, there's a selfish side of that wants me to be like, I hope they get knocked out, but also, they're a really good team. They came back really well with Astro coming back.
My hope is we have them last game of the season, I believe. So I just kind of hope they're already out by the time they get to us, so they don't have anything to play for.
That's
so
fair. And that actually
yeah.
kind of leads into something that I noticed when I was doing research for the podcast, which is basically this. We talked a lot about the Lunar Conference already. When you look at Solar, basically what we have left with minor differences is who's fighting to avoid being in the 4-5 matchup that has to play Gallimimus in the second round.
Yeah, I mean, and funny that you mentioned that because my team has to play Gallimimus and Drizzle this upcoming week. So stats wise and on paper, my team looks very similar to Drizzle. I think like in the game we're very different teams. I feel like my team is very defensive and focuses on not letting a lot of shots through and capitalizing on mistakes. And Drizzle is a very, hey, let's try to drive as many shots down as we can team.
They are an aggressive team that if you don't get good clears on them, they will hammer you with shots.
Yeah.
They're a nuts team that way.
So that's going to be deciding right there. What if we 2-2? Then hey, we're still in a 3-way tie with Firecrackers, depending on how they do on Monday. But if we 3-1 or they 3-1 us, then it's like, well, the team that lost that series is down 1 more game, and if it's us, we have Gallimimus to play Wednesday, and depending on how that goes, we could potentially looking at ourselves in that 6th or 7th seed where we may end up having to play Gallimimus again first week in playoffs.
If you do face Gallimimus, it would be funny if you just eliminate the first round.
So that's the thing about Gallimimus is they're gonna go in cold in their matchup because the 9:30 games are the wild card games, and whoever they face, they'll be facing someone who just played a competitive series. So you're talking about a team that I think Gallimimus can do it. They're gonna find a scrim.
I'm trying to wrap my head around what you just said.
So have you played in tournament? You've played in a tournament, right?
Yeah.
Where
they have a first round bye.
Yeah. So
maybe.
Well, if they're first seed, yes.
They have a first round bye. They would have to lose so many games for Zomberries to catch them. So we're operating under the assumption. Guaranteed. Yes, you're right. Operating under the assumption that they or Zomberries, whoever gets the number 1 seed, is going to be coming in cold versus a team that if it's Firecrackers, Nebelungs, Legends of Tomorrow, Dolphins, all 4 of us have had really hot recent streaks. Drizzle's kind of been falling back a little bit, but they're still a really good team too. But those 4 teams have all been 3-1ing consistently, sweeping, like we're playing our best Rocket League right now. And to have to, as the number 1 seed, without getting the benefit of having just played a playoff series, face that, like, yes, they can do it. And if you're the number 1 seed, you should be able to overcome that adversity. but you may see them come out slow, sloppy, not playing at the same intensity, and that could decide that series.
Yeah, and now that you mentioned it, that kind of comes to mind. I don't know how the tournament seeding looks for that first round where the 1 and 2 seeds aren't playing.
So I checked. So because there's 7 teams, 2 play 6, or sorry, 2 play 7, 3 play 6, and 4 and 5 play each other. Gallimimus plays the winner of the 4-5 game. And the reason why it's set up, yes, because the reason why it's set up that way is that they don't have to play the 2 or 3 seeds.
Okay.
Before the semifinal or before the conference finals.
Okay, so that makes sense. So looking at it that way, then there's, I mean, depending on how my team and Drizzle's weeks go, and even if Legends of Tomorrow or Dolphins are able to pull off some pretty good wins throughout the next 3 series, then you have what looks like maybe a matchup between the 4 and 5 seed teams, which are all very good teams, whether it be Firecrackers and Nebulungs or Drizzle and Dolphins. Either way, that's going to be a very good matchup, and then that team's going to come off of a series, whatever team wins, hot to play Gallimimus, who hasn't played a series that night yet.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm sure they will. For all I know, they'll scrim with Wobegongs, the other number 1 seed, or Snow Owls, or whoever the number 1 seed ends up being, and that could be a great way for them to stay warm. But there's just something very different about playing a series for literally your playoff lives and warming up for a series. And so I think it's going to be really interesting. And I bring it up because genuinely I want them to figure out how to warm up correctly. I want both teams to go ahead and start thinking about that. At the end of the day, I want to see the best team win the playoffs. I'm not one of those people who's like, yes, upsets. Like, I'd love to see upsets, but I want to see upsets because that team is better that day. Not because Gallimimus came in and just weren't ready in terms of being warmed up, or Snow Owls or whoever.
I think a lot of teams want to see that.
Yeah, there's something very important for Solar specifically, though, because in Lunar, it's a 3-team race. Maybe Pioneer, you could argue, is in the 4th spot, but they need to win against good teams. In Solar, realistically speaking, every team in the playoffs right now would probably be in the playoffs in Lunar, too. The difference in strength of schedule between these 2 conferences is absurd. In terms of, so when you look at those differences, Solar has more good to, top 8-ish, we'll say top 12 to top 4-ish teams in that bracket than Lunar does. So while I think Lunar probably has 2 or 3 of the best 5 teams, 3 I think of the best 5 teams, they have a very weak secondary roster after that. So I don't think it's nearly as worrying for a Snow Owls or Wobegongs, whoever takes the number 1 seed on their side as it will be for us. And I'm belaboring this point, so I'll stop. But I just think that's really interesting that we're at this point and we can kind of start thinking about those things.
Yeah, and I don't know how many people has actually realized, hey, there's only 3 games left. I'm not sure if you realized that, Bonk, earlier when we were talking in the chat, and you mentioned something about having predictions for MVPs and All-Stars this early, and I go, there's 3 matches left. So we got next week, and then the week after we start the playoffs and on Wednesday. So yeah,
that's a fact. It's gonna get real interesting. I say that every podcast, but genuinely, it gets really interesting because next week
now is the time.
Yeah, now this is the time because that last matchup, we play Dolphins, and I won't be able to play in that series, so our 4th's gonna get a chance to show what he can do. But that week's gonna be really crucial for seeding because Dolphins, I think, is a really good team, and right now they're only a game back of Firecrackers. And yes, this week kind of plays favorably for us just because we play Ravagers and Airbuds. But if we come out of this week 5-3, let's say, they easily could match that, and then suddenly that's a huge final week matchup. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens. As you mentioned with Nebulungs, that's going to get brutal in a hurry, playing Gallimimus and Drizzle. And I think that's going to be a really interesting set of matchups. I didn't mark them as games to watch for the week just because I don't like picking our own team super often.
Yeah.
But I think that's definitely something that's going to be crucial.
I'm not too worried either. We go 3-1 all the time. It'll be a 6-2 week for us. No big deal.
Or a 2-6 week. You never know.
Oh.
Well, the pain in your voice.
Yeah, don't do me like that. Come on.
That's fair.
Okay. So if that's it for our playoff talks right now, I'm gonna halt those for a little bit later, so we don't just dive into that rabbit hole. I think we can move into our top tens coming out of week 6. That's fine.
Yes,
Uh,
absolutely.
Yes.
and first we have you, Elephant.
So my top 10 is Gallimimus, Zomberries, Snow Owls, Sparks, Wobegongs, Firecrackers, Nebelungs, Pioneer, Legends of Tomorrow, and Dolphins. Um, Nothing super crazy. I moved Galley back up to the top. Because while I do think they and Zomberries compare very favorably, I do think Gallimimus is still the better team. Zomberries, I think, is the clear second best team in the tier in my mind now. Snow Owls could be that. I think that they have a crazy high offensive ceiling and play really good defense when they're on it, but their strength of schedule this season has been atrocious, and so I have trouble necessarily for sure saying that that's the best team. Sparks,
We keep
Wobegongs, you could go either way.
you
Sorry, go
keep
ahead.
bringing up strength of schedule, and that's interesting to me because, I mean, except for the 2 out of conference games, there were 15 games played total. So 13 of them are all the same teams. Like every team in Lunar is going to have the exact same strength schedule with the exception of the 2 out of conference teams they played.
Sure, but that's why I'm
So it's
talking about
interesting.
two solar teams ahead of my first lunar team. So I have
I
Gallimimus
guess
and Zomberries ahead of, who are both in solar, ahead of the lunar team.
I guess
So I'm
that's
saying
fair.
as a whole, I think solar was a much more difficult conference, and they still excelled in that conference. Sparks,
Oh,
Wobegongs, I think are really good. My team, I think that because we beat Nebelungs and Drizzle, we move up. Pioneer, I can't give them up. And Dolphins, I think, have solidly moved themselves into top 10. And that is my top 10 for this week.
okay. We'll go into mine here. And I had to drop Zomberries down for that. They got 3-1 or 4-0. I forget. This Wednesday, I believe it was. So they're no longer one for me. I got Snow Owls up there, and I've actually dropped Wobegongs and Galley down to 4th and 5th, just because I do think Wobegongs is a better team than Galley from what I've seen so far. But like Wobegongs is also like dropping series like recently and tying series, and it's just not characteristic of what we've seen in the beginning of the season. They've lost the
You're gonna
series,
get
but
shanked.
Yeah, they're gonna come after you, but I also kind of agree.
yeah, so they've lost both the Sparks now, which is why I have them above, and then they lost the Soul this last week, and that was kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back for me as far as keeping them, in the top 2 or 3. So now that's why they're sitting at 4, and it's hard to rank these top 5 because the the 4th and 5th team are gonna feel like they're kind of ripped off as far as the ranking, no matter who you put there, but it's just that all 5 of these teams are so good in my opinion that like depending on the day, any one of them could be up in the top 2 or 3. So it's just hard to try to rank them because you put the teams that you think are performing the best at the time up there, and then the next thing you know, the teams that are also very well, such as Wilburgongs and Calamimus, and doing very good, are now 4th and 5th, and it's like, well, that doesn't seem fair. But
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I was having this discussion with a GM, and basically, Prospect at this point is like 6 good championship caliber teams, and then a couple other teams who are, on their best days championship caliber, and then the rest of the teams honestly are pretty close in parity at this point. So when you talk
mm-hmm.
about that, that means you're going to see a lot more, I think, in these last 3 weeks, what we would consider upsets from earlier in the season, because teams have gelled. Teams that and there are teams that have given up or are close to giving up, and once they officially get dropped out of the race, they may just, we may see some forfeits. We may see some teams where people just, suddenly family things came up that magically appeared out of nowhere. That happens every season, and not in a shady way, just in a like it sucks to lose.
My pet
So
rock died. I'm sorry.
yeah, like people tell me every season that there are instances of people just being like, yeah, I can't make it tonight once they drop out of the playoffs, and that happens. Like, I'm not judging anybody for it, but that does mean that we may see some sudden shifts in series that maybe we weren't expecting, or like a team that's like 20, right in the middle. Once they get dropped out of playoffs, they may take 2 games off a team normally, but now, like, are they still motivated? That kind of thing. So that's the other half of where we're at. And that may get some shit. That may not make people happy to have me talk about that, just because no one wants to hear competitive issues like that. But I think it's important to think about specifically in our tier where there's a lot of seeding things up for grabs.
I mean,
I
it is
definitely
the
agree.
truth that people will just become unmotivated after they get dropped out of the playoffs.
It's just a human
People
nature
get-
thing for sure.
I mean, I'm not gonna lie. I was barely motivated to do this podcast tonight. I just wanted to go to bed.
I mean, fair enough.
That's fair. That's fair.
Yeah,
So,
dude.
with all that said,
Yeah, let me finish my top 10.
Yeah.
How about that?
Exactly.
So we'll round out my top 10 here, and I got Nibblings and Firecrackers, and I kept my team there because I'm biased, and also because I feel like Nibblings, Firecrackers, and Drizzle are all three kind of neck and neck right now. So I just put them in the order of favorite to least favorite. So actually, if that was the case, I probably would have had Firecrackers below Drizzle, but that's besides the point. And then I have Pioneer and Dolphins to round out the top 10, both very good teams, and I think they're those are probably the two that deserve that spot for me.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And Bonk, I think this is, I don't know when the last time it was that we had you on to present your own top 10, but here you go. The floor is yours.
It's been like at least a year.
It's been a long time. So
All
what do you
right.
have to say for yourself that these are just the standings?
All right, so first of all, I
Yeah,
have no
hold up
bias.
before we start.
No, shut.
I'm gonna mute you. Okay. No. I'm just kidding. So
No.
Go ahead.
I asked everybody to send me their top 10 so I can create the graphics, right? And last
Yes.
week when they did it, King Bonk sent and I was with Tiny Potato last week, and King Bonk sent his in, and I created the graphics, and then Potato was looking at him, and he goes, "These are just the standings, but with my team removed." So this week,
I think I was at school at the time.
So this week, when I look at the ones he sent me again today as I'm making the graphics, and I go, "These are just the standings, but like exactly the standings." Just like Drizzle's team is like in, and it's literally like if you
Drizzle.
like the only difference is like if you go on the stats standings page and read them off, they're all in order except for Drizzle, Firecrackers, and Nebelungs and Legends of Tomorrow. He kind of swapped those, but I'll let you continue with your top 10.
Yeah, I'd like to hear this.
So no bias, I didn't get bribed with bread or any violence, but
Jesus, why do you have that sound effect ready? Oh my god!
Don't question.
It wasn't a sound effect.
Yeah, it was not a sound effect. Please, help. Anyway, so I have Galley number 1, obviously, because I again have no bias and I'm not being bribed. Snow Owls, Bubblegons, Sparks, Zomberries, Pioneer, Firecrackles, Drazzle, Niblungs.
Are you purposely saying
What
those names like that?
He said
And
he said Firecrackles.
And then Drazzle. God, this podcast is taking a fucking turn.
Yeah, fine.
No,
Okay,
genuinely,
continue to explain yourself.
I have all to explain. I don't know how much time I have left.
Go ahead.
No, you have plenty of time. Continue. We can take all the
I
time
don't
you
know
need.
how long till I get shot.
Oh.
Wow. Oh no. All right. So I know you love Gallimimus. You're friends with them. So moving from there, why did you decide what you decided on the rest of the list?
I think he just looked at the stats page. Is that what he just said?
I think he did. Okay, well that's fair. Okay, well next week.
I mean, fair enough. You're a straight ticket voter.
Next week we're cutting him from the rankings. We're gonna have Tiny Potato rank instead.
No, I'm ranking.
All right. So
I got a
moving from
headache
there, and our terrible tangent. God, we sound like the regular podcast now. What a crying shame that was. Going to games to watch.
No. Let's not throw any shade. We'll have some action taken.
We'll get copy strike.
That wasn't shade. That was a solid statement about how they choose to do their podcast. All right. So we have our standard 2 games of the week to watch. Monday is Pioneer versus Urix. Pioneer is desperately trying to pull themselves into that top 3, show that they belong at the top of Lunar as an actual like championship caliber team. Urix is desperately trying to make the playoffs. Bonk is now a starter, so it's an exciting time.
Not sure if I'm
right?
still a starter or not.
Okay, never mind. Bonk got cut. Anyway, going to Wednesday, Snow Owls play Sparks, a gigantic matchup at
Yeah,
the
that's
top
huge.
of Lunar. I think we'll find out a lot.
I think what we'll see is Wobegongs drop to third in Lunar. Bold predictions. How
So
does
here's
that
my
work
thing.
when
That
how does
doesn't
that
work.
work?
That doesn't make sense. But no, I think that they're second in Lunar for me right now, even having lost to Sparks. If Sparks comes out and beats Snow Owls, it's gonna really make me think over who actually is the best team in that conference. Um, Conversely, if Snow Owls comes out and smashes Sparks, then even though Wobegongs did well against them, I think I'd probably just say Snow Owls is the best team. They're peaking at the right time. So these are kind of crucial matchups for a variety of reasons, but I think there's also interesting to see and find out what happens. And the podcast is running super
What
long,
about the
so
Erks?
No, we're
I mean,
fine. We're fine on time.
talking about Urix, they have done some amazing things. Both prior to Bonk joining, and then since Bonk joined, it's gotten even better. Um, Turns out winning an amateur championship does matter. Gives you some good experience, I guess.
Mm.
I'm really curious to see moving forward if they'll be able to seal the deal here, or if they just fell in too big a hole to start the season. Um,
I
and
mean,
I hope it works out.
as far as their magic number goes, that is the magic number of games they have to win to lock a spot in, which they're not going to actually clinch a spot this late in the season, but it's just a good metric of how far out of the playoffs you are. Seventh seed for their conference is 12 and they're 15, so 3 games out. So it's not impossible. It's definitely doable.
Yeah, especially with how
Hey,
magic number works, right? Because like every week every time it gets recalculated because if as teams lose it changes the number, so
Yeah.
that number can be very flexible. And you're right, week to week it's a good indicator, but also it could, they could win out, have a sweep against Pioneer in some amazing moment, and that honestly would probably push them way higher up the list,
Mm-hmm.
both in terms of
we
wins in
already
a
got
real
pushed.
sense, but also in a figure in the terms of it makes their magic number much more achievable because they'd have beaten one of the best teams left on their schedule.
Well,
So I think
also
that's going to be exciting.
the race also could just turn into, hey, we need to lose less than the guy above us,
That's very
and
true.
That's how it is. What you mean?
I mean, and they have Gorgons, Spartans, and Wintergreen above them, and if they can just lose less than them and lose a total of 3 games less than them, then they have found themselves in this playoffs.
Yeah, absolutely.
But
Or
going back
this is
on
advice to any team. Oh, the hold is advice to any team above the Erks. Please lose all games. Thank you.
He
okay,
wants to see
Bonk's
only
just turned
sweeps.
into a solid memester at this point.
He has.
Oof. But I wanted to go back on the Snow Owls Sparks game real quick. I just did the math in my head because it was really hard math and I had to take a second to think about it. But, Sparks 3-1 Snow Owls, which is very doable in my opinion. They're both very capable teams. And then Wobegongs gets a 2-0 or less. Then you have, Snow Owls at the top, Sparks second, or tied with Wobegongs, or even ahead of Wobegongs. So my comment about Wobegongs dropping to third is not totally out of the ballpark. But I just wanted to defend myself there. So
I'm with
yeah.
you. I'm with you.
Any other comments or questions or concerns anybody want to bring up before we hit it on out of here?
No.
No
I'm
physical
good.
violence or threats we want to
I
make.
think we talked about literally everything we could talk about now that we're finally back together as a group.
Yeah, I think we did good.
Um,
Well,
if you have any
this
hate comments for any of my hot takes, send them to Bonk. He would be glad to talk to you about them.
I will leak my address so you can come and find me.
No, do not do that. Oh man.
okay. Well, that was it for week 6 of Prospect Plebs. If you enjoyed, hit the like button. Consider subscribing. I don't really do YouTube that much, but that's cool. Otherwise, we'll be back next week. See you guys.
Yes, we will. Thank you.